Produced by Liang Gu, Chapter 1 of Meng Jiangnu, Burning Books. After Qin Shi Huang destroyed the 6 kingdoms, he issued an edict and ordered the world, except for medicine, divination, and tree planting, all books must be burned, that is, the historian. In addition to the history books of Qin, they must also be burned. He also set a time limit for burning books, which was limited to 30 days from the date of the edict. In ancient times, the fastest method of walking was riding a horse, which could only cover 100 miles in a day. Therefore, for places 2,000 miles away from the capital Xianyang, the deadlines in the edict are not accurate. If the fire is not burned within the time limit, the victim will be taken to the government office and punished as a qingdan. Qingdan is a kind of servant who is responsible for cleaning the city walls and the streets outside the city walls. The penalty period is 4 years. After being punished, people have to have words tattooed on their faces and apply juice on them, which cannot be washed off for the rest of their lives. The edict was sent to Yongqiu, now Qixin County, Hunan Province. The county magistrate took a look at the imperial edict copied from the bamboo slips. Knowing that there was only 30 days to burn the books, he quickly sent the copied edicts to various villages. When this edict was sent to Wanja village, it involved Wan Shiliang here. He was a scholar who was studying. After reading the edict, he thought, "The first emperor is so powerful, why do he even want to burn the books copied by my people? Moreover, the edict stipulates a time limit of 30 days. In addition to the 10 days of delay on the way, there is only 20 days left. I need to make this clear to my father." So he walked back to the inner room, met his father Wan Shantian, and explained the matter in detail. Wan Shantian was wearing a blue silk gown, a black turban on his head, and a long beard. At that time, after hearing what his son said, he said, since the county magistrate sent someone to read the edict, "This is the emperor's edict. Who dares to resist? Tomorrow, I will bring the big ox cart that I use at home, load it with bamboo slips and wooden documents, and then send it to the county. I will ask the county magistrate to see it, and then light a fire in the open space of the county government office. Burn it and it will be clean." Wan Shiliang held the blue thick silk shirt on his body and said hesitantly, "It took a lot of effort and how long to carve these bamboo slips with a book knife. It is really not easy." Seeing his son's hesitation, Wan Shantian felt that fortunately there were still a few days left before the deadline. "I had no choice but not to talk about it now." On the 3rd day, 2 officials on horseback came from the county. When they arrived at the gate of Wan's house, one of them asked on horseback, "Is Wan Shiliang at home?" Wan Shiliang didn't answer in the study, so the 2 men got off their horses and tied them to his door. They all held wooden sticks and riding whips and walked straight to his study. When Wan Shiliang saw it, he quickly stood up and gave up his seat. The 2 men ignored him and looked around the study. It turned out that the books he copied were bamboo slips, which were piled everywhere. These bamboo slips I used a book knife to carve words on it. The words were very large. Only a few words were engraved on a piece of bamboo slips. When more than 10 pieces were engraved, they were pierced with thread and called a volume. Therefore, to copy a book, you need to use a lot of bamboo slips and it takes a lot of effort. Wan Shiliang surrounded the house. They are all framed with wooden boards, with bamboo slips threaded on them stacked on them. This is the study room. In addition, there is a table more than 1 foot high, with a poof next to it, where the owner copies books and reads. Officer A said, "You don't have much at home, but you copy a lot of books." We sent the edict the day before yesterday. You have read it, but why haven't you touched it yet? Shiliang stood aside and said, "Of course we have to move. It's just that our family is young. How can we move these books to the county? I am worrying about this at home. I wonder if these books can be moved one after another. If you say it's okay." Tolerance A shook his head repeatedly and said, "No. No." At this time, Wan Shantian came back from outside and saw 2 horses tied at the door. Knowing that an official business had arrived, he quickly entered the door, bowed to each other, and said with a smile, "I plan to move books, but I don't have enough cars. I plan to hire 2 cars in the village tomorrow, and then load them up with my family's car and move them to the county." Mr. E said, "You still don't know how to do this. Your family has many books, and almost everyone in the county knows about it. Now we need to count some books to see how many volumes there are in total. After counting, we also need to see if there are any other books hidden in your home. If not, if your father and son have a knot, then it's over. If there is a collection of books, then only your father and son can ask. Do you understand?" When the father and son heard this, not only could they not hide the books, but they also couldn't hide some fragments of the book in the house. Therefore, Wan Shiliang stood there, just in a daze. Shan Tian knew that this was official business and could not be offended, so he smiled and said, "That is natural, and only by doing this can we be clean." The 2 commissary officers laughed together. Commodore B shook the horse whip in his hand and said to the 2 of them, "You 2 have nothing to say, right? I need to order some books." Shanda even said, "Please." The 2 businessmen took advantage of the fact that both father and son were in front of him and ordered all the slips and certificates. Shantian quickly felt around in the kitchen and under the bed, and found several bamboo slips, and they were all broken, which he explained to the official. "There are really no books at home." Mr. Jia laughed loudly and said, "Let me tell you. The 6 countries of Shandong had 10 times more soldiers than the Qin state, and we, the first emperor, wiped them out one by one. If you don't follow the edict, you will have to touch yourself on the shoulders." "How many heads does it have?" After saying that, he took the riding crop and swung it at the door, making a loud bang. Although Shiliang was very angry, he still looked kind and just stood aside without saying a word. Shantian smiled and said, "Yes." "Anything else to order?" Gongchang said. You come up with a knot and say that the books have been sorted out, which is indeed what they are. Apart from this, other than the books on tree planting, medicine, and divination, you should not burn them. If there are still books and you have not burned them, you will be willing to accept the crime. Shantian said yes repeatedly and said to his son, just follow what Gongzhao said just now. Let's make a knot. Shiliang didn't dare to say anything. There was a square wooden barrel next to the case, with many unwritten bamboo slips inserted in it. He sat on the thin pillar, picked up the book knife on the short case, leaned against the case, and bamboo pieces without words. He engraved it as the official said, then stood up and handed the bamboo slip to the official. The official took a look and said, let's go. The books need to be burned. According to the number we ordered, not a single piece is missing. Also, I have to make it clear that you must deliver the books to the county tomorrow. Shantian just said that he knew, respectfully sent the two servants out of the gate, and watched them mount their horses and leave. Wan Shiliang stood in the room and sighed. His mother, Mrs. He, came out and shouted, I have heard what the official said. Just send it to me. I'll look for a book tomorrow and copy another one. Wan Shiliang couldn't help but laugh and said, if I copy the next one, where can I copy it? If people have books, they have to burn them too. He thought about it and smiled, no. Just don't have these books. It would be good for my son to work with his father in the fields. Shi Liang was always filial, so he agreed, yes, and helped his mother into the room. The next day, Wan Shantian hired 2 cars in the village and added himself one of them, 3 in total, was placed in the yard. He took out the bamboo slips one by one and put them on the car. When Shiliang saw it, he felt very sad, so he came closer and said to his father, I can't think about it any more in the county, lest I see a torch in person that my whole life's hard work has been burned up. I think my father must have handled the county magistrate's affairs very well. Shantian said, I originally planned not to let you go. You see, it is the middle of March, and the fields are full of reds and purples. It is very beautiful. After dinner, let's go out for a walk. Shiliang promised, very good. So Shantian drove to the county. Shiliang had breakfast, said goodbye to her mother, and went out. Chapter 2 Peeping into the garden. It was the middle of March, and Wan Shiliang was wearing a jacket, and the sun was warming him. There is a row of willow trees beside the stream. It is full of green shade. There are 2 peach trees among them, which are even more lovely. Sometimes, I encounter a village that is full of fresh greenery, with a few flowers mixed in, some deep red and some light purple, which I find very beautiful. I looked at a village like this. This is another village, and the scenery changes from time to time. I just went home when I saw the sunset. At this time, Shantian also came back. He didn't say anything about the county magistrate. He just watched the books being burned and asked people to come back. Xiliang only said, "It's really a big sin." The next day, Xiliang ran into the study. Of the books that were placed all around, not even a single bamboo slip was left, and the room felt empty. In the past, if he encountered such a good day, he would always put the book on the table and read it, turning over the bamboo slips one piece at a time, and then another. Sometimes a bee would fly into the room. The buzzing sound is very interesting. Now that there are no books, I feel that it is too boring to stay in the incomplete study, so I might as well go for a spring outing. I thought it was right and told my parents. My parents tried their best to say yes. After lunch, he walked out of the door. Yesterday we went east, but today we went west. After walking for more than 10 miles, I saw lush trees in front of me. There was not a single short miscellaneous tree for 2 or 3 miles. To the south of the woods, there is a clear stream flowing out, which just slightly separates the pedestrian path. Approaching the clear stream, the water flows out of the woods, mixed with many petals, and slowly trickles in the water lines. When Xiliang saw it, he secretly applauded and followed the clear stream from south to north, walking slowly and carefully. Suddenly I saw a pair of red painted doors in front of me, with a short wall on both sides. They were all thinly covered with wheat stalks. There are many trees planted in the wall, and a few flowers peek out from the corners. Xiliang looked at the inside from a high place outside the wall, and it seemed like someone's garden. I listened carefully with my ears, but there was no sound even though the sun was warm and the wind was gentle. I saw only a few pieces of fallen flowers, and when blown by the slight wind, a few pieces floated out of the wall and landed gently on the ground. I was happy and thought to myself, what a peaceful place. So he found a few stones, piled them up against the wall, and climbed up. At the gap in the wheat stem, look inside. Looking at it, it turned out to be a garden. There is a lotus pond on the right. At this time, there are only a few lotus leaves floating on the water. There is a pavilion by the water, quiet and deserted. There is a road beside the lotus pond, and there are several trees with flowers near the road, which are in full bloom. Just as he was about to take a closer look, he suddenly heard someone say, "Xiaochun, please go ahead, lest there be any inconvenience when someone is in the garden." When Xiliang heard it was a woman's voice, he felt that there was no one in the garden. Sure enough, he saw it and it was inconvenient for each other, so he planned to avoid it by jumping away. But there were 2 firewood sticks inside the wheat stalk, which caught the clothes. They couldn't untie them for a while, so they had to untie them slowly. The person who spoke has arrived. In front of him is a girl of 13 or 14 years old, with a bun on one side of her head. One side of her hair was braided, tucked under a bun, and she wore a purple coat and pants. Behind him came a girl of 18 or 19 years old, with a bun on her head, a long pink gown on her body, an oval face, 2 long eyebrows, and a straight nose. Born very handsome. The elder girl said, "This elm leaf plum blossom is purple and red, how beautiful it is." Go ahead and ask the doctor or madam to see the flowers." The little girl agreed yes and walked away. At this time, this big colorful butterfly appeared. It flew over her head. As soon as the girl looked up, she saw the butterfly, which aroused her interest, so she used the whisk in her hand to catch the butterfly. The butterfly flew high and low, attracting the girl to the roadside. She saw that the butterfly was very cunning. He raised his sleeves and threw the fly whisk over. The butterfly was startled and flew outside the wall. Her sleeves were very big, and when she lifted her arms to flutter the butterfly, her hands were naturally exposed. When the girl saw someone standing outside the wall, she said, "Ouch." Wan Shiliang wanted to get rid of the stick inside the wheat stalk, so he stayed outside the wall. Now when the girl shouted, he had just finished undressing, so he didn't dare to stop and jumped off quickly. After taking just 2 steps, I suddenly saw a farmer standing in front of him with a hoe and said with a smile, "Mister, I've seen you peeking here. This is Dr. Meng's house. In fact, if you want to see it, please go in and take a look." Shiliang threw away the dust on his body, cupped his hands and said, "Oh. Dr. Meng's family has been living in seclusion here for many years." Before I could say anything, I suddenly heard a "ah" sound coming from the red door. Suddenly it opened and 4 men came out. One said, "That's him. The dirt on the wall is still stuck to him, and it hasn't been brushed off yet." As he said that, he pointed at Wan Shiliang. Wan Shiliang said, "Yes. I took a look at the wall of your house just now. Isn't this illegal?" The man said, "This makes sense. It's just that our doctors want to question you face to face. You go with us." After hearing this, Shiliang thought to himself, "Go ahead and take a peek at someone else's garden. If they say a few words, you have to endure it. Don't go ahead and peek into the garden. After all, it's a trivial matter, so maybe don't scold me." So I felt a little embarrassed standing here, just groping for my blue shirt with both hands. The farmer put down his hoe, shook his hand, and said with a smile, "It's nothing, it's March, the time when flowers are blooming. When your husband heard that the flowers were blooming well in Meng's home, he moved the stones, raised his feet, and took a look. I think this shows that Dr. Meng can't blame you. Just go for it." Shiliang said, "I heard that Dr. Meng is a very good man. I would like to meet him. But going to see him at this time seems to be too much of a loss in terms of etiquette." Nong laughed and said, "Whatever it is, go ahead." A few people came out of the red door and went 1 step further, surrounding Wan Shiliang. Shiliang said, "You surrounded me, but you wanted me to come to your house. I'll just go. Fortunately, after meeting your doctor, I can just apologize." When the men heard that he was willing to go, they made way for him to go first. So he took courage, entered the gate, and went up to the pavilion by the way the girl fluttered the butterflies. Chapter 3: Promise of Marriage. At this time, the girl disappeared. The pavilion was covered with a mat, and an old man sat on the mat. The old man wore a square scarf and a purple silk robe. Look at his 3 strands of beard floating on his chest, and his face is very kind. Shiliang has not come near yet. The old man originally thought that the person who came in must be a bad guy. When he looked up, he saw that it was not the person he imagined. He was a young man with fine features and handsome appearance. He said, "Ah," and stood up quickly. Shiliang walked under the pavilion. He bowed to the old man and said, "I just saw the beautiful garden of your mansion outside. Look around, there are few people around, so I boldly moved a few stones to rest my feet and took a look outside the wall. I met a farmer and said this is Dr. Meng's house. I feel so ashamed." The old man smiled and said, "I know that this matter is all due to a misunderstanding. When I took a step to look at my garden just now, my little girl happened to be fluttering butterflies here. She said that there were people looking outside the wall. I think there is something in our garden that can be taken, nothing more than seeing the lush flowers and trees in this garden. Just looking at it. But of course it is inconvenient to meet a woman. I asked my family members to go out and see who it was, and invited them to see me. I plan to tell the people in the garden to come, but please say something in advance so that the women in the family can avoid it." I didn't expect him to be one of his subordinates. Shiliang didn't expect that this old man spoke very well, so he bowed his head again and said goodbye. The old man touched his beard with his hand, thought for a while and said, "Today you come to the house to see our garden. Maybe I haven't seen enough. Please look at it again. Also, I have nothing to do. Please come to my house and have a quick chat." Shiliang then said, "I obey." The old man liked it very much, so he got down from the pavilion and led him to the main room. This main room is a large room with a lattice door on one side. The remaining 3 walls are lined with grass-woven piers for people to sit on. In the middle, there is a foot-high billboard. In addition, there are some wooden barrels with dust tails, bamboo slips and the like inserted inside. There is a large courtyard in front of the door, surrounded by pine and cypress trees. The old man introduced the door. He asked him to sit on it, but Shiliang didn't dare. He sat on the grass pier next to him, and the old man sat across from him. After sitting down, the old man asked you your name. Shiliang said, "My name is Wan Shiliang. The edict came 2 days ago, and the books of hundreds of schools of thought were to be burned together. Of course I didn't dare to disobey, so I sent the book to the county and burned it. My parents saw that I was very sad, so they ordered me to play around the village. Because I saw that the garden in my house was very nice, I spent some time outside to look at it. Not only was the doctor not surprised, but I was treated leniently, which I didn't dare to do." The old man said, "Oh, you are brother Wan Shiliang, who has been famous for a long time. I am glad to meet you. My surname is Meng, and my nickname is Longda. My dear friend, you may already know that I have resigned here for more than 10 years. I only feel that there are great things in the world. We are old, has become useless, the hope for the future. It's all on you young people. At that time, the two of them had a heart-to-heart talk, and it was very interesting. Shi Liang then vomited out all his words, which made Longde even more happy. He ordered his family to make 2 bowls of soup. After a while, Zi Gongfu. The family brought 2 large pottery bowls, filled with boiling water, and put some ginger and onions used at home. This is the soup. After drinking the soup slowly, Shi Liang looked at the sun in the yard and saw that the shadows of the pines and cypresses had moved eastward, so he stood up and left. Lund stood up. He blocked it with his hand and said with a smile, "Wait a minute, let me call you brother. We have had a great time together today. It would be a pity if it ended like this. You must tell me when to come back. The best is tomorrow." Shi Liang said, "Even if I don't go back today, there's nothing wrong with me. However, there are only 2 people in the family, my father and my mother, and I went away. I said it was just for a spring outing and that I should go back early so that my parents would not miss me." Lund said, "This is what it should be. Go back and tell your parents that you can stay with me for 2 days tomorrow. Our place is called Meng Jiangnu. I think your father must also know." Shi Liang said, "Okay, I will tell my parents tomorrow before I bother you." Lund held on to one of Shi Liang's hands and sent it outside the gate. He waited until Shi Liang's figure disappeared on the road before going back. Returning to the inner room, his wife, Mrs. Wang, with her daughter Meng Jiangnu, she was stitching together under the window of the house. This Meng Jiangnu was the one who visited the garden just now. The word ginger originally means eldest daughter, but also means beautiful woman. But there is also such a legend, the Meng family and the Jiang family. They live close to each other. The Meng family planted a melon tree, which grew vines around the Jiang family's wall. Later, only one melon grew. And this melon is also next to the wall of 2 families. So both families wanted to pick this melon. However, the 2 families did not want to lose peace over this matter. The melon was divided equally between the 2 families. It happened that the melon had just been cut, and the Meng family gave birth to a daughter. This woman became the godmother of the Jiang family, so she had 2 surnames and was called Meng Jiangnu. This kind of legend is quite interesting. Lund immediately said to his daughter, "After you visited the garden, you asked me to chase the man peeping outside the wall, so I sent 4 of my family members to chase the man back. This man is a wise man, and his knowledge is also very good. As for you fluttering butterflies, it is all a coincidence." Wang looked at Longde. Seeing him, he was still overjoyed, so he said, "Have you ever asked these people what their surnames are?" Longde said, "Of course I have to ask. His name is Wan Shiliang, and he will come to our house for a long talk tomorrow." Mrs. Wang sat, looked at her daughter, then at her husband, and said, "My daughter and I." After looking behind the house for a long time, he looked like a living being. Ah! Will you come again tomorrow? Longda stood at the door of the room, looking at mother and daughter, as if he still had something to say. After a moment of silence, Wang said, "You seem to have something to say." Lund said, "There is indeed something left unsaid. But I'm not going to say that for now." When Mrs. Wang heard about it, she looked at the girl. Meng Jiangnu stood up from the grass pier, tugged on her clothes again, and walked out. Longda touched his beard with his hand, and then said, "My thoughts, I think you will understand too. When he comes tomorrow, I want to talk to him about marriage. I asked him about it. He only has 2 parents in his family, and they seem to have never been married. As said, it's not like I won't agree." You guys watched Wan Shiliang behind the house for a long time. What do you think? Wang was very happy after hearing this. He quickly nodded in agreement and went back to the back room to discuss with his daughter. In the afternoon of the next day, Wan Shiliang came again. This time, it was obvious that Lund and I knew each other very well. We sat in the main room first, and then walked around in the garden. Lund saw this. It was time to mention the marriage, so he climbed a branch of a tree and said nonchalantly, "Brother, since your family is so small, won't your father make a marriage decision for you?" Of course Shiliang didn't know that he meant to mention marriage. Seeing that Lund had stopped, he stopped too and said, "Although the marriage has been mentioned several times." When Lund heard this, his heart skipped a few beats. He continued, "There is always no success. Now I burn the books to see if I will stop studying, so I will change my career." What career to change, I still don't know yet. As for marriage, that is out of the question. Longda put down the branch, stretched out his right hand and said, "If I really haven't decided on a marriage, I have a marriage plan, and we can discuss it." Shiliang said, "Old man, what kind of thing is this?" "My nephew still dares to lie?" Lund coughed twice, touched his beard again, and then said, "The marriage mentioned is not someone else. I have a daughter named Meng Jiangnu. My brother used to look at the scenery in the garden and saw it. If you are not abandoned, I will betroth my daughter to you." Shiliang never dreamed that the person he mentioned was his own daughter. Of course he was very happy and said, "Old man, of course I am very grateful for such kindness. It's just a matter of marriage, and my parents are still at home, so I have to tell them before we can do it. Decision. As for my nephew, all obey orders." Lund smiled and said, "In this way, Ditai has already agreed. As for reporting it to your parents, that's what you should do. I think your father-in-law probably has nothing to say to my daughter." Shiliang bowed 3 times and said, "I should have called him father-in-law. But the parents don't know yet and they have to wait for a few days." Longda nodded. That night, Wan Shiliang was left to stay at the Meng family. Early the next morning, Shiliang was asked to report to his parents. Of course, the Meng family was a famous family, and both Shantian and he agreed happily. Chapter 4 Buyu. Weddings in ancient times were very complicated, so there is no need to mention them here. After Wan Shiliang and Meng Jiangnu's wedding, Meng Jiangnu said in the bridal chamber, "Wan Lang, although the books are burned now, there is no harm in copying some things that are not prohibited." Shiliang sat on the pillar and replied, "Yes. We still have to continue to study. But my parents have already said that the Wan family is just a son, and the Meng family is only a daughter. They told us to live on both sides, live at home. After a few days, you and I went there together. I have something to do at home, so I can come back first and you can stay longer." Meng Jiangnu was about to go out. She held her hand on the door frame and said, "Yes, my parents-in-law have said this many times. It's just that I've only been here 7 days, so let's talk more slowly. Now I plan to tidy up the machine so that I can weave silk." Shiliang said, "You've just been here a few days and you're already weaving silk. Isn't it too early?" Meng Jiangnu said, "No, if you don't work at home, you are just idle. It's good to knit a little." After that, she left. Shiliang thought, Meng Jiangnu is really a good wife. She used to enjoy doing everything at home, but actually, it doesn't matter if she doesn't do it. Her father-in-law is a learned man, and she copied all his books. Now that she wants to weave silk, won't she bury all her books? At night, he lit a vegetable oil lamp. There was no book left, and he turned to the lamp on the short-legged table. With some reverie, the door rang and Meng Jiangnu came. He quickly stood up and offered to sit down. Meng Jiangnu did not sit down, but turned her back to the light, pointed to the moonlight outside the window and said, "Look at the moonlight night. The night is very beautiful. Let's go to the moonlight, do you like it?" Shiliang said, "Okay. I was just thinking about stepping on the moon." Meng Jiangnu said, "I asked my mother-in-law just now, and she also said that you have no books to read in the room, so you are very lonely. It's just right to look at the moonlight." Shiliang said, "Okay, let's go." The two of them walked out of the room and walked into the fields. This is the weather in April. The wheat and millet in the fields grew green tents under the moonlight. In some paddy fields, the green rice seedlings in the fields are also 5 or 6 inches high. As for the trees in the fields, they are all green. In addition, the weather is neither cold nor hot, and the cool breeze blows. Meng Jiangnu walked in front. A round of moonlight shines on the body, and the leaves are lightly shaded. When one walks through the shade, there is an indescribable deliciousness. Shiliang was behind and said to Meng Jiangnu, "The moonlight is just right. It seems to be round but not round. It tells us that the beautiful scenery is still behind. Do you have such an idea?" Meng Jiangnu said, "That's exactly it." The two talked and moved forward. After walking for about 2 or 3 miles, we came to a bay of flowing water with 2 trees on both sides. The moonlight was shining, it was dark under the shadow of the trees, and bright outside the shadows. Shiliang walked to the front of the stream and picked up a stone. Throw it into the running water and make a dong sound. Shiliang said, Look, I have a good comparison. That is, we are a pair of shadows, one on the surface of the water and one on the bottom of the water. Even if a stone is thrown into the water, our shadows are still a pair after all. Meng Jiangnu came closer and said, That's right. No matter where you go in the future, you will always go together. Saying this, Shiliang was very happy. After playing for a while, I went back the same way because I was afraid that my parents would wait for the door. The next day, Meng Jiangnu took a bamboo slip. He carved it with a book knife. She carved 2 figures, rippling on the water, and a pair of figures at the bottom of the water. Because he gave the bamboo slips to Shiliang to read. Shiliang clapped his hands repeatedly and said, Wonderful. Leave this souvenir of the pair to me. Meng Jiangnu smiled and said, This is carved for fun, not a thing. Why do you value it so much? Shiliang said, That makes sense. In the future, I may go somewhere else, and I will keep this bamboo slip by my side, as if we are still together. Meng Jiangnu said, I'll leave it to you. But where you go, I will go with you. Shiliang put the bamboo slip into his pocket and said, Yes, we will go together. A few days later, he said to the 2 of them, You can go to Mengjiazhuang. If you don't want to go, others can tell you. When you have a husband and wife, you don't need parents anymore. Both of them laughed, said goodbye to Wan's parents, and returned to Mengjiazhuang. At that time, Meng Longda and Wang were very happy to see that they were very affectionate, and they specially packed a room for them. A house for 2 people to live in. Lund taught Shiliang some knowledge about the past and present every day, and Wang also taught his daughter about female workers, so the 2 lived in the Meng family very interestingly. After staying for a few days, the weather became noticeably hotter in one night. Meng Jiangnu asked Shiliang to go to the garden behind to cool off for a while. Shiliang naturally agreed to go with him. The 2 walked into the garden. The half-moon hung crookedly on the top of the tree, illuminating the shadow of the tree dimly. The fruit on the tree is already half-ripe. Look at the pond again. Lotus leaves are already piled on the water surface. The branches are covered with green leaves above the water surface. They walked slowly, but Shiliang was hit on the head by a fruit. He smiled and said, What kind of fruit was it? Dash. Meng Jiangnu said, This is a pear tree. It is very ripe in July and August. If you eat a few more at that time, it will be a loss. Shiliang said with a smile, You are right, when it is ripe, eat more. Both of them burst into laughter over this matter. Shiliang and his wife, like this later, lived in Wanjiakan for half a month and in Mengjiazhuang for half a month. It was already at the end of June when they spoke, and Shiliang said to Meng Jiangnu, It's almost 100 days since we got married. I plan to have a good time on this day. But what should I do? We should think about it. When he said this, the whole family was doing various things in the main room. Shan Tian grinds mills, he splits flax, and Meng Jiangnu weaves silk. Xiliang stood by the door and saw that everyone was busy, but he just couldn't get involved. Suddenly I heard the ringing of horse bells, and there was more than one person coming. Meng Jiangnu pointed to the door and said, "Father, listen." This time the horse bell rang. Shan Tian said, "No matter what it does. We don't lack food, and we don't miss official duties. Even if the official business has something to do, he won't come to my house." Just as he said this, the ringing of the horse bell came to the house. After a while, I saw 7 people walking in the door with an officer in their arms. This is strange. Shan Tian immediately stopped grinding and moved forward to question the officer. The officer had already arrived in the main room, and the people who followed him were standing inside and outside the room. The officer first said, "Do you have Wan Xiliang here?" Xiliang saw that the officer had entered the main room to ask questions. It was something he couldn't avoid, so he said, "Yes, I am." The officer looked at him and saw him standing quietly by the door, and smiled. "That's good. Now my village has sent 10 people to build the Great Wall. I have been ordered to come and pick them up. You are included. Now I allow you to say goodbye to your family. We will wait for a while and then leave." Ouch! Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law shouted at the same time. Several people in the hall were frightened. Speechless. Xiliang thought for a while, and it was useless to be afraid when encountering such a thing, so he said, "Building the Great Wall is of course a good thing, but our village has already sent people there a long time ago. Why do we need to mention people again?" The officer said, "If you say you know this is a good thing, then that's easy to say. To build the Great Wall, is it enough to just send a group of people last year? According to people from Xianyang, the work of building the Great Wall will require the 3rd, 4th, and many more batches of people. It seems to me that you are a living being, right? All living beings are sensible. You know the will of the first emperor, and you have to go as soon as you say. Otherwise, I have brought many people here, and you won't be able to leave." When he said this, everyone in the hall understood. You looked at me and I looked at you. No one had anything to say. Woo-woo, Weiss. The whole hall was already crying. Chapter 5, Life and Separation. When Wan Xiliang saw this situation, he knew he had to leave, so he left the door and walked to his parents. He bowed 3 times each and said, "Parents, there is no need to cry. It stands to reason that the Great Wall should be built in the north to guard against barbarians. This is also a good thing, but the procedure for recruiting people is wrong. Naturally, this was the edict of the first emperor. Their officers only acted according to orders and had no control over it. There is no use in trying to reason with him. They took bamboo slips with names engraved on them. All he knew was that he would take the bamboo slips and pass them on according to his name, and when he passed them on, he would be commissioned, and he didn't know anything else. The officer came in with great arrogance. Later, when he saw Xiliang talking to his parents, he was very reasonable, so he put the horse whip in his hand on him. He flicked it to the side and said with a smile, "This one Xiliang is a scholar after all, and his words are quite reasonable." This edict was passed from county to county, and from county to township. Except for us, everyone at the entrance of the village. If you want to run away from someone, of course you can't. As for whether you build the Great Wall or not, you go talk to the first emperor. We have nothing to do with it. Shan Tian dusted himself off with both hands and said to the officer, "If you use these words to push against the first emperor, will you be fine?" In fact, you won't quit this officer's job? The officer looked at him and sneered, and said, "I don't think your son is about to leave. I will whip you half to death. I quit my job and you give me food to eat? And if I don't do it, others will do it. Isn't your son going to build the Great Wall?" Xiliang said to his father, "This is not the time to be reasonable. There is no need to argue with him. Good wife, I'm probably leaving. Do you have anything to say to me?" After saying that, he bowed his head to Meng Jiangnu. Meng Jiangnu had stopped weaving silk for a long time. As I walked down, the tears fell down like a string. When Xiliang asked him a question, she wiped her face with her shirt sleeve and said, "I couldn't think of anything to say to you at the moment. I just wanted to ask this officer, when will he be on the road?" The officer said, "We dare not delay the edict of the first emperor. We will leave immediately." Meng Jiangnu let out an ouch and started crying again, saying, "I'm going to leave right away. What did I say?" At this time, he couldn't help crying. When the officer said he was leaving immediately, she said, "This is so powerful." Leaving soon? Good. We fought hard. While talking, he stood up and ran towards the officer. They were preparing to play this chess game. There were two soldiers standing beside the officer, and they heard her say the word pin. Then they got up together and stopped he. He couldn't grab it, so he sat on a poof and cried. Meng Jiangnu stepped forward, took Wan Xiliang's hand and said, "You are walking so fast. I didn't prepare anything for you on the way. How can this be so good?" The officer interjected, "This level. You don't have to worry. Today's departure is just to gather in the county. There will be hundreds of people on the road tomorrow. On the pavilion, you can still see me off. As for what you have to do, just take care of it. You can send it to the county this afternoon and leave it to me for collection." There is absolutely nothing wrong with this. Shantian stood by the door, looked at his son and said, "It seems like the county magistrate has known about this for a long time, right?" The officer didn't say anything, just smiled. Meng Jiangnu was still standing in front of her husband, crying and said, "You went ahead and left your parents-in-law at such an old age. It's hard to say what will happen next, but I will always serve my parents-in-law well at home, so don't worry about that." When Xiliang saw two soldiers guarding his mother, and 2 soldiers guarding his father, he felt extremely sad and wanted to cry. He was extremely angry. Can't cry. After Meng Jiangnu said these words, he shed tears and said, "Then I'm relieved. It's just that we only get together for 100 days, which is too short. My father-in-law and mother-in-law are very loyal to me, so I can't go and pay my respects." Was pulled away. When you see your father-in-law and mother-in-law later, plead guilty for me. Meng Jiangnu also had a few words to say, but there was already a cry in front of the room. The officer said, "Do you hear it? This is a member of your village who has already left. Because you are all living beings. So I made the trip myself. Now that everyone has left, it's time to finish talking, let's go." 2 soldiers came over to pull his clothes. Shiliang still refused to leave. He said, "I'll just leave." "Why bother?" The officer said, "Do you have anything else to say?" Shiliang said, "Of course there is. We, as a family, have been living a happy life together, but now we are separated and separated for life and death. Just for a moment, don't we have anything to say?" The officer's expression changed and he said, "Did I break up your house? Walk. We can't control much." As soon as the officer said, "Go," several soldiers dragged one of them forward. Shiliang couldn't resist, so he jumped and shouted, "Father, Mom, good wife, I am being dragged away. Tomorrow we will say goodbye to each other in the Chongqing Pavilion of 10 miles. Come on." There are also a pair of figures carved by the good wife. I'll put this bamboo slip next to the bed. You can bring it to me too. Meng Jiangnu agreed in tears. At this time, there were 3 people from the Wan family. They were stopped by 4 generals and could not move forward. Seeing that Wan Shiliang was pushed and pulled by the 3 people, they rushed out of the gate. Meng Jiangnu cried, "I will come to the farewell party in Chongqing tomorrow." But apart from calling "my son" a few times, my parents had no time to say anything else, and they were pulled out of sight. At this moment, people from the Wan family were really crying to death. Shantian held the door. Seeing the soldiers surrounding a dozen civilians, they called their names, whistled, and left in a swarm. "Here, mister, he is sitting on the poof and sobbing." Meng Jiangnu wiped away her tears now, walked over to her mother-in-law and said, "Mom, it's useless to cry now. We cleaned up Shiliang's cold clothes and quilts and asked him to take them away tomorrow." Shantian walked in and interjected, "Although I asked him to carry it with me, Kira doesn't have much strength. I'm afraid he won't be able to carry him if he carries more." Meng Jiangnu said, "Yes. Let's bring 2 thicker clothes." He said, "You have to bring a quilt. If you don't have a quilt, then don't let my child freeze to death." After talking and crying. Because Shantian couldn't bear to leave his son, he went out of the gate by himself, climbed to a higher place, and looked out of the village. Sure enough, there were dozens of soldiers escorting a group of young people on the road to the county. Naturally, these young people were reluctant to leave their wives and children at home, but the soldiers escorting these young people just commanded them with their horse whips in the air. If it were thrown on the body, it would be a bloody mark, so the young people could only lower their heads and walk forward. Shantian just watched, and then only a shadow of the person was left. Then he sighed and planned to go home. At this time, Wan Changfa from the same village. The two old men, Wan Jingjiu, each wiped their tears and walked towards the village. Shantian cupped his hands and said, "Are you two sending me to build the Great Wall?" Changfa and Jiujiu both stopped. Changfa sighed and said, "Yes. I saw that your son is also there." Shantian said, "But he has been copying books since he was a child and has no strength at all. I think this time he will be in trouble." Changfa said, "We can meet again at the pavilion tomorrow. We don't have to think about the past. Just don't miss it tomorrow." Shantian said, "When will we go tomorrow?" Jingjiu said, "Then let's go early in the morning. The officer told us to go and get breakfast." They wanted to have breakfast and set off. As for clothes and other items, they can be sent to the county today. Shantian said, "We probably all heard the same thing. Let's go back and check our clothes." The two old men nodded repeatedly and were too lazy to say anything. Shantian walked home. The mother-in-law and daughter-in-law had stopped crying and tied 2 bundles of Shi Liang's clothes and other items on the bed. He's still looking for it. "I was thinking about what else to bring." Shantian saw that her mother-in-law and daughter-in-law had both walked to the bed, and they were both silent, saying, "It will be very difficult for a child to carry something weighing 20 or 30 kilograms. What else are you thinking about?" Meng Jiangnu patted the bundle twice and said, "In this bundle is a quilt, and in the other one are clothes and miscellaneous items. If he builds the Great Wall, it will only take 3 to 5 months, and these things will be enough. If it takes 3 to 5 years, or even 10 to 8 years, that is not enough. So I wanted to bring him some money. As long as Xiliang has money, there is nothing to worry about." Shantian said, "Of course I have to give him some money, but the family has very little money." Meng Jiangnu said, "I still have a little money, which was given to me by my father. Please bring it all to him." Shantian said, "Don't you want to use it?" Meng Jiangnu said, "It's him who matters now. As for me, I don't need money. Even if I use money, I will go to my father later." Shantian said, "My son is such a good wife." Chapter 6 Chongting. Seeing that the sun was already setting in the west, Shantian did not dare to delay and packed his bags. Meng Jiangnu took out the money. Also packed in small pockets. Shantian took it and hid it in his long coat. Then he took in a small burden and put the bundle on both ends of the burden. Without saying another word, he picked up the burden and headed towards the county. At this time, the county government designated a courtyard for those who would build the Great Wall. all together in one place. There were more than a dozen soldiers guarding the door. Shantian came to the gate and told the soldiers how his son Shiliang went to build the Great Wall, and then he let him carry the load. Shantian came to the courtyard and saw more than 20 people, who also brought things. They wanted to see the people building the Great Wall, and the soldiers would shout out whose name they would come out. After coming out, he stood side by side with the person who called out first. Naturally, the parent who brought the things came face to face with the person who came out. There is no room for error in the rules here. Because there are also more than a dozen soldiers supervising this place. If anyone makes a mistake, the soldiers will come over and interfere loudly. Shan Tian saw what others were doing, so of course he would do the same. Put the burden before you and stand still before it. There were several rooms in the north of the yard, and the soldier shouted to that room, Wan Shiliang. Your family is here with something. Then a door opened and Kira ran out. He called out, Dad, hurriedly ran to the burden, and knelt down to Shan Tian. When Wan Shan Tian saw his son running out, he couldn't help but shed tears. When Shiliang knelt down, he bent down, reached out and touched his head and shoulders, and softly called, Child. Shiliang waited until his father touched it before he slowly got up. Shantian said, Some of the things on this load were brought to you after careful consideration. I'm afraid you won't be able to pick out too many. Thanks to my daughter-in-law, Shantian looked around. The soldier was standing 2 feet away. It was not convenient to mention the money, so he said, She took care of it all. As he spoke, he lowered his body, rummaged through the things slowly, and deliberately untied half of his long coat. As if he was afraid of the heat, and the passengers didn't notice, he put the small bag containing the money inside the baggage in the basket. Shiliang understood at that time, nodded and said, Meng Jiangnu's kindness. I'm grateful. Shantian said, There are some things in this baggage, you must use them carefully. Do you know how many years it will take to build the Great Wall? Shiliang said, Yes. Tomorrow, when the sun will be about 2 or 3 feet high, I can meet with my family. I hope you and Meng Jiangnu will wait in the pavilion. Shan Tian said, We will definitely arrive. Is there anything else you can say? That day. He is only 32 years old, so I advise my parents not to be too sad. Shantian said, Although what my son said is true, you have to take care of your food and drink all the way. When autumn comes, you will have to change to cold farmers. Also, no matter where you build the Great Wall, it will be thousands of miles away. No one will visit you, so you have to take care of yourself in everything. At this point, they looked at each other and said nothing for a long time. At this time, someone came in from the yamen and said loudly, It's getting dark now. Everyone who has delivered things should go out together. If there are those who bear a burden, put it down, and they will pick it up. As he spoke, he took the horse whip in his hand and just swung it in the air. It looked like he was going to hit someone. Everyone didn't dare to say anything and walked quietly. Shan Tian only said, "Tomorrow, sure. Come." Also walked out of the door. When Shan Tian walked home, it was already the first watch of the morning, and he saw Mr. He and Meng Jiangnu sitting in the main room waiting. When Meng Jiangnu saw Shan Tian, she stood up and asked, "Daddy is back. Have you met Xiliang?" Shan Tian looked outside the house. He talked about the situation when he arrived in the county, and then sighed deeply and said, "No more, let's all go to Chongqing to see him off tomorrow." The next day, when the rooster crows, the 3 members of Wan Shantian's family get up quickly, ask their neighbors for help, and lock the door. Just go up to the pavilion. Although it is summer weather, when I got up early in the morning, I still felt a bit cool in the morning breeze. Looking into the sky from a distance, the waning moon that sets in the west, coupled with the 3 or 5 o'clock dawn stars, looks even more desolate. Meng Jiangnu was walking in front and said, "Dad, it's almost dawn." As we sent Xiliang away, the sun became brighter and brighter as we walked, which was a good fortune. Shanda followed behind, thinking, "The sky will always be bright. What kind of luck is this?" But he didn't say so, and said, "Yes, that's good." The 3 of them were talking. Walking slowly from the main road, it was daybreak and we arrived at Chongqing. This pavilion is a pine forest, with an octagonal thatched pavilion in the middle of the forest. At this time, many people, men, women, old and young, had come to see him off. There is a road leading to Xianyang under the pavilion. People gathered on both sides of the avenue. The 3 members of the Wan family sat on the grass beside the pine forest, waiting for the people who built the Great Wall. The sun was 2 or 3 feet high, and these people were indeed here. At the head is an officer riding a tall horse. Behind the officer were 20 or 30 soldiers, all wearing battle clothes and skirts, carrying swords and spears. Behind them was a team of more than 120 people. They were all dragged away to build the Great Wall. These people all carried burdens with quilts, bundles and other items on them. At last, more than a dozen soldiers escorted him. When they arrived at Chongqing, dozens of soldiers immediately dispersed and surrounded the people building the Great Wall in a large circle. These soldiers raised their weapons and shouted, "The people building the Great Wall are standing still, don't move. You are allowed to meet your family, but don't run around." The people who were building the Great Wall listened to the soldiers and just walked forward. When they reached the edge of the pavilion, the soldiers shouted to them to stand still. Everyone put their burdens on the ground together. People on both sides saw him off. When he sees his relatives, he says, "My son, elder brother, keep shouting." But the person who was called just nodded to the family members and did not dare to speak. An officer walked up to the grass pavilion and looked around first. He saw soldiers surrounding the intersection. Moreover, the close relatives of the people who built the Great Wall are here, and they cannot run away. Then he said, Now you are allowed to meet your family members, let's go. When everyone hears the word go, everyone rushes to their relatives. Kira ran to the pine tree. The family members came to greet him. Mr. He had long ago shouted, "My son, now I can see you." The two elders stood next to the pine tree, while Meng Jiangnu stood leaning against the pine tree. Shiliang called Dad, Mom, knelt down in a hurry, kowtowed 4 times, turned around and stood up. Then he bowed 3 times to Meng Jiangnu. Shantian said, "Son, I can't say anything right now. I just hope you can take care of yourself at any time." He kept calling my son, but couldn't say anything. Meng Jiang leaned against the pine tree, frowning and closing her mouth. With tears falling drop by drop, she picked a pine needle and pricked her clothes with it, as if pricking her heart. Shiliang said, "You treat me so well. You know I can't carry many things, so bring me more money." "But my family has no money, so you gave me all the money your father gave you." Meng Jiangnu took 2 steps forward, threw away the pine needles, tried her best to hold back her tears, took Shiliang's hand, looked at it and said, "Why do you say such things? What's yours is mine. What's mine is also yours. You don't have the strength to build the Great Wall, I'm afraid you won't be able to do it." Shiliang said, "That's okay. Many of us have never done rough work, and we will get better after doing it." Meng Jiangnu said, "You don't have to worry about the housework. I will do my best to do it. My second brother loves me very much and will forgive me if I don't do well." Both elders nodded. Shiliang said, "I know you will take care of the family affairs. There is also that piece of bamboo slip with 2 figures carved on it. I carry it with me now. When I built the Great Wall, I also carried it with me. I will take it home with me in the future. Good wife, when the time comes, you should praise me for still carrying this thing." Meng Jiangnu said, "I hope so. But I remember you were at my house and you touched the pears. At that time, I said, when the pears are ripe, eat more of them. The pears are not ripe yet. Just leave." Shiliang said, "It's too much to mention this kind of thing." Shiliang saw that his parents were just crying, so he said, "Two old people, there is no need to cry. I hope that the Great Wall can be repaired and completed soon, so that I can come back soon." Shantian looked at the horizon and moved his hands and said, "I heard that the Great Wall starts from Lintao in the west and ends at the Yalu River in the east. How long it is? How long will it take to complete this project?" At this time, someone suddenly shouted, "Return to the team." Shiliang shouted, "Oh, I'm leaving." Meng Jiangnu ran forward, grabbed Shiliang's clothes with both hands, and shouted, "Husband, you only met with your family once, are you leaving?" Shiliang choked and said, "I have no choice." At this time Shantian, Mr. He stretched out his hand to pull his clothes, and cried, "You can't leave. You can't leave." But at this time, many people continued to shout, "Return to the team." At the same time, more than 120 people building the Great Wall were being pulled by their families, and they were crying in unison. A chorus of calls for son and husband filled the air in front and behind the pavilion. Meng Jiangnu cried, "Husband, it's hard to say when we will meet you once you leave. If you don't come back, I will serve my parents-in-law. If my parents-in-law are not here, I will go to the ends of the earth to look for you. If I can't find you, I will never come back." At this point, she held the hand holding the clothes and held on tightly. At this time, the officer gave another order to the soldiers, "Tell them to return to the team quickly. I'll count 100. If it goes over 100, I'll kill someone." He said it. Those soldiers shouted, "Hurry up and return to the team. If you return late, you will be killed." After the soldiers shouted this command to kill, the people building the Great Wall would push the people they were pulling as hard as they could, no matter how tightly they were being pulled. "Knock your hands off, turn around and run away." The same goes for Shiliang, who shook off his family members like a gust of wind. He only raised his hand to shake it and hurried back to the team. When the officer saw more than 120 people coming, he shouted, "Let's go." All the people who built the Great Wall left, and after the soldiers left, they left the pavilion. The 200 to 300 people who saw him off cried in unison, and some even followed him to watch. "Here, Mr. He shouted, 'My son,' and fell to the ground crying. Shantian and Meng Jiangnu also cried and squatted beside the pine tree. Chapter 7 Sharing. The Great Wall, since the Seven Kingdoms. It has been built from generation to generation. The current Great Wall starts from Jiaguan Pass in the west and ends at Shanhaiguan Pass in the east. Speaking of the Qin dynasty, it starts from Lintao County, passes through Helan Mountain and Rihe in the north, and reaches the Yalu River in the east. Most of the young people recruited by the Qin dynasty in Hunan and Hubei went to the west. That is to build the Great Wall in the northwest. Why is the word repair added to the text building the Great Wall? Because at that time, Zhao State and Yan State both had great walls. After the Qin dynasty destroyed the Six Kingdoms, the Great Walls in various places that were not connected were connected and enlarged. So I added the word xiu. More than 100 people who were drafted here left their hometown and walked west along the Xianyang Avenue. Shiliang carried the burden, which weighed 20 or 30 kilograms. He didn't feel it was heavy at first, but after carrying it for a long time, he felt a little tired. After 2 more days, I felt even more overwhelmed. Because there is an officer supervising here, and they have to walk at least 80 miles every day. Anyone who can't keep up with the team will be whipped with a horse whip next to him, so this burden is on his shoulders. Didn't get a good rest. However, he had to bear the burden even if he couldn't afford it. He was determined not to put this burden on others and insisted on practicing without feeling tired. Otherwise, this little thing will be a treasure for survival later. It would not only be a pity to throw it away, but also you might have nowhere to buy it if you have the money. When it came to the food of these people, Qin Shi Huang didn't care at first, so these more than 100 people had to feed themselves. This officer made a plan for more than 100 people: get up at dawn and have breakfast. After walking for 40 miles, the sun will probably be at the top. I quickly looked for a house, and when I found it, I put firewood in the stove, cooked the food, and had lunch. There was no fixed time for dinner in the evening. Sometimes I walked 40 miles, sometimes 50 miles, and found a house. Just made dinner. Wan Shiliang followed the team. He was very tired this day and had no energy to make dinner. So when he saw food sellers on the way, he bought more, ate one meal and saved another meal for the next day. Eat again. And keep the money and use it slowly. Spend less money on food. Two farmers met on the same road. One was named Wan Baiqing, the son of Changfa. The other was named Wan Mingren, the son of Jingjiu. These two farmers are very honest. One day, the brigade arrived at Taolinsai. I stopped, looked for 7 or 8 stores, and found various kitchens, and then I was busy cooking. But Shi Liang didn't cook, so he just found a stone on the ground near the gate of a house, sat down, rested, and looked at the wild scenery. At this time the sun was still 10 feet high. There are many trees. He looked at the mountain forest in the distance, which was a vast expanse of green, and where the sun shined, the trees were a little yellow. The yellow river has just finished its song here, and you can hear the gurgling sound of the water. Seeing this dusk scene, Shiliang couldn't help but let out a long sigh. At this time, Wan Baiqing came from the door. To the left and right of this door stood 8 fully armed soldiers. Shiliang sat by the door, with his knees together, his head in his right hand, and his eyes looking at the forest. Baiqing walked up to him and asked, "Shiliang, what are you thinking about?" Shiliang said, "Don't think about anything, just look at this mountain forest." Baiqing said, "You should go and cook." Baiqing said, "It's cold, how can it be delicious? It tastes like chaff when eaten." "Here, I'll steam it for you." Shiliang said, "I've already eaten it." Baiqing looked at Shiliang, rolled up the sleeves of his gray clothes, exposed his thick arms, and sighed softly, "Look at how strong my body is. It seems to me that you are having a hard time carrying the burden. Divide 2 pieces of clothing and put them on my load, okay?" Shiliang said, "Thank you very much. I had a hard time carrying this burden for the first 2 days, but now that I have the strength to endure it, I don't need to do it anymore." Baiqing looked back and saw the soldier standing far away, so he whispered, "Beings like you. I need you to work hard, this is." Shiliang shook his hand at him and said loudly, "Fortunately, it's all the same, please leave more to my brother. On the way, it's enough to ask my brother to take care of everything." Baiqing saw his actions. He knew that he was afraid that the soldiers would hear these words. There was a lot of inconvenience, so he said, "Brother, if you have anything to do on the way, come to Akihito and I. Just look after you and we will take care of you. Don't be polite." Shiliang said, "That's good. Thank you from here." After saying that, he stood up and bowed. Bai Qing saw him. It was like I had difficulties, but I didn't dare to say anything. I couldn't say anything at the moment. I thought, I'll see Akihito later and discuss it before we discuss it. So I said goodbye to Shiliang, went to find Akihito in private, and whispered Shiliang's words to him. Akihito's temperament is more straightforward. After listening to Bai Qing's words, he sat on the ground, climbed up, stretched out his hand and said, "What's the point of this little thing? Tonight, the two of us will unpack his burden and carry it one by one. It weighs 5 or 6 kilograms, so that's nothing." Although Shiliang refused to say that he couldn't pick one, he couldn't say any kind words when we really decided. Bai Qing thought it was right and agreed. After a while, everyone had eaten and spread straw on the ground. Shiliang was about to go to bed. An oil lamp was lit on the ground, illuminating the room dimly. In Ziliangwu, there were 20 or 30 people, all lying on piles of straw, taking a short rest. At this time 2 people came. Bai Qing is a strong young man, and Akihito is a big man. One person is just as good as 2 Kira. When Shiliang saw the 2 of them coming, he quickly stood up and offered his seat. Akihito said, "We don't need to say any polite words. It seems that you are having a hard time carrying your burden. Let me and you divide the weight between the 2. We don't weigh more than a few pounds, it's nothing. Don't refuse." Shiliang said, "This is too unacceptable." Bai Qing blocked his hand and said, "I told you not to refuse, so don't refuse." The people living in this house also saw that he was struggling to carry the load. They all advised him not to refuse. Bai Qing didn't even wait for him to say anything, and found some silk and cotton clothes from his burden. Put it on the straw pile. Shiliang saw it from the side and said, "I'm really grateful to you 2 for helping me like this. But you 2 don't need to bring too much." Akihito said, "Since we are willing to help, why bother with it if it weighs only 1 or 2 kilograms? The items on the straw pile now weigh only 12 or 3 kilograms. The 2 of us split up. You have lost 12 or 3 pounds. If only half of the load was taken, between the 2 of us, it wouldn't matter. Take a look at it and see what it is. These are just a few ordinary clothes. What else do I deserve? This really needs to be seen. I, Mrs. Wan Shiliang, don't know what's going on." Although Shiliang said this, Bai Qing still counted the straw piles, divided them into 2 piles, and sandwiched them separately with Akihito. Akihito smiled and said, "Tomorrow, Shiliang will have a good day's walk." The 2 of them walked away smiling. The next day, we continued walking westward. This was the capital of the Qin dynasty, and there were many people coming and going. Travel to Li, now Lintong County. That's more people. These people are all criminals. It was assigned to build a Fang Palace here. There are probably hundreds of thousands of these prisoners, so the people in this field are just like the streets. These more than 100 people seem very insignificant here. Therefore, the officer gave another order. Since there were too many people on the road to Xianyang, our team changed to the main road on the right. With this order, they lost the main road to Xianyang and started on the side road. Although it is a side road, but there is still a steady stream of people working. The number of people who went to the front to build the Great Wall increased especially here, with teams of 100 or 10 people and teams of 50 or 60 people coming from all over. If there are sick people or dead people in the team, just throw them on the roadside. Xiliang walked quietly and said softly, "There are so many people, this life is so worthless." Chapter 8 Desert. After walking for 7 or 8 days, there were gradually fewer people on the road. After walking for another 6 or 7 days, it took half a day to meet 1 or 2 people coming from this road, but those who were leaving. There are actually 2 batches, and these are all for building the Great Wall. At that time, someone asked these soldiers, "The place where we are building the Great Wall is probably almost here, right? May I ask where we are building it?" The soldier replied, "Are you asking me? I don't know either." None of the soldiers knew, and only the officer knew. As for the officer, he did not have the courage to ask him, so he walked forward in confusion. The road went further and further northwest. If you walk in one direction, the more people there are, the less people there are. Naturally, there is no one else. Sometimes I can walk for half a day without meeting anyone. So when it was lunchtime, the team took out their own pots and spoons, dug a hole in the ground, set some weeds on fire, and cooked for themselves. At night, if you still can't find someone, then find a sheltered place, wear more clothes, sit on the grass, and sleep overnight. Isn't it the middle of May? It shouldn't be cold, but in the northwest, that's not the case. People at noon. You can wear a jacket. If you want to sleep at night, you can cover yourself with a quilt. If you eat one meal like this, eat one hungry meal, sleep one night, and stay up all night, of course you will be sick. If it is a minor illness, you still have to follow the team. If it is a serious illness, you will be left on the roadside. No one cares about life or death. Xiliang looked at the situation and decided to wear more clothes at night. It would be better to be warmer than to be cold. If you are so careful, you are not sick. But as I walked a little more, I slowly started to see the desert. This desert area can be seen for dozens of miles at a glance. There were no trees and no grass, just sand. Sometimes there is a dry depression filled with endless pebbles. Camel grass also grows in some desert lands. This grass is a plant with thin leaves, like cypress branches, but the leaves are not dense. Moreover, It only takes a few steps to grow one plant, and the top is only 2 feet high. The desert is light yellow in color. This camel grass has grown several times, but it cannot be covered. The people who built the Great Wall here gathered in 15 teams, about 1,200 to 300 people. These teams are extended to 5 miles, and one team is less than half a mile away from the other team. If something happens, the front and rear can be easily merged, and the strength will naturally be much greater. Because this place is close to the barbarians, there is no telling where the barbarians will come out. This place is more than 1,000 miles away from the mainland, so there is no need to prevent the people building the Great Wall from escaping, so the team is much more relaxed. However, there are no people here, so food and accommodation are very troublesome. Where can I dig a stove and put down a pot to cook something? Then have a meal. There is still very little water in this desert. With more than 1,000 people eating, it would be a lot of trouble to find water. As for sleeping, it doesn't matter where, as long as the ground is flat, you can sleep. I don't even think about big trees or ridges. Shiliang passed through the desert that day, and the setting sun was still 2 feet high in the sky. Here is a large lush dam with dozens of poplar trees growing there. The officer ordered to rest here. After eating the black buns and having nothing to do in the evening, Shiliang looked up. It was the 9th day of the lunar month and the 10th day of the lunar month. The new moon was exactly half a circle, and there were a few stars. It illuminated that there were no homes outside the earthen dam, and only a dim and chaotic light reached as far as the horizon. He thought, how do the 2 elders in the family miss me at this time? Poor Meng Jiangnu is sitting under the moonlight, how to spend her time. He stood by the poplar, picked a few leaves and crushed them. Suddenly he heard a clear chanting sound. Shiliang was startled by the sound, threw the leaves away, listened carefully, and felt soft at times. Thin. Sometimes it is grand and very pleasant to listen to, and then it slowly disappears. Later, I found it, and it turned out that there was a big stone over there. A young man was sitting on the stone, holding a row of bamboo tubes in his hands and blowing there. About 20 people were sitting and standing around listening. Just as Shiliang arrived there, the young man put down the dongxiao, stood up and said, "Here comes a confidant. How was your playing just now?" As he said that, Dong Xiao attacked him a few times. Shiliang said, "I dare not tell you about my close friend." Shir plays very well, as everyone who listens to Xiao here knows. "What's your surname?" The man said, "My surname is Yang, and my name is Buffon. I don't have any hobbies, I just like to play the flute. I heard that we have reached the edge of the Great Wall and there is moonlight above. There are white poplars below, and I feel like home." At this point, he realized that it was inappropriate to think of his hometown, so he changed his words and said, "This scenery is very interesting, so I'll just blow it up for a while." Shiliang said, "My dear friend, he seems to be a gentleman." Buffon said, "I know that my name is Wan Shiliang." He is a living being. As for me, am I not the same as me? I'm in the third team. If anything happens to you, just come to me. Xiliang said, excellent. The moonlight is very beautiful. Let's not talk about anything else. Brother Fan will play another part. Cough. Stop talking, just brag. Buffon smiled. Then he sat on the stone, hugged Dongxiao, and started playing. This time the wind was blowing no better than before. It was whining loudly and had a sad smell. At the end of the session, Buffon took a look and saw that there were many people in the audience, wiping their eyes with their shirt sleeves. He smiled deliberately and said, by this time, it was already getting late. If you think this Dongxiao is okay, maybe we are still gathering together on the edge of the Great Wall, and I will play it again. After saying that, he bowed his hands to Xiliang and everyone and said goodbye. Anyone who knows extraordinary things. It is said that the last part of the xiao he played was his self-complaint. After hearing this, Xiliang sighed for him. Xiliang gained another friend. During the day, each section goes to its own section and may not be able to meet each other. In the middle of the night, each section finds a place to rest and find an acquaintance. Meeting friends is inevitable. Xiliang walked in the desert for 4 days and arrived at the location where the Great Wall was built. This area is where there are no city walls. Looking forward, it's all desert. Where the eyes can't see, there are some white clouds. There is a bit of mountainous land on the left. There are no trees on the mountain, and the color of the mountain is dark green. The place where the city was built was actually land, just like a boundary was drawn. The Great Wall was built along the boundary line, with land inside the Great Wall and desert outside. There are a total of 15 teams along this route. All together in one place. Xiliang encountered something extraordinary at this time and said, look, this is flat land. We have to use our 2 hands and a pair of feet to build a city wall. It is 5 feet high and 2 feet thick. Is it human strength or God's great power? Buffon said, it looks like this. Human power is still great. Xiliang whispered, although people are powerful, it is a pity that these people are asked to build the Great Wall. This is not asking people to build the Great Wall, but using us like cattle and horses. Buffon also sighed slightly. It turned out that the place where Xiliang arrived. It is the place east of Helan Mountain. The Great Wall will be newly built here. More than a mile to the left of this place, 2,000 people were building it. It is also 1 mile to the right. There are more people here, 3,000 people. This is the close neighbor of people like Xiliang. Go further. Even within 3 or even 10 miles, there are many people from Xiliang's distant neighbors. In addition, there are even more people building the Great Wall. Meng Jiangnu, the general who guarded the border, was the one who initiated the construction of the Great Wall. The total number of soldiers under Meng Jiangnu's command was 300,000. More than 500,000 young people were recruited. With so many people building it in sections, there are no people anywhere along the Great Wall. The northwest corner of the Great Wall, beside Helan Mountain, is the most miserable place. Because no one lives here, there is no food or shelter. They had no choice but to dig holes in the ground. 3 or 5 people live together. The method of digging a hole is also very simple. Where there is a ridge, dig out a door and find a place for 3 or 5 people to sleep inside. If you encounter flat ground, dig a deep and wide dry trench with earth walls on both sides. It would be easy to dig a hole in a deeper place. As for rain, it's rare in that area. If it occasionally rains, you can take shelter in a cave. Speaking of eating, steaming a tray of black buns is a good thing and not easy to eat. What they usually eat is fried noodles. This kind of powder. It is ground from buckwheat, beans, barley and other grains, then fried and served in bags. When I'm hungry, I just fill the bowl and eat. There is no fire, no side dishes, oil and salt. Shiliang lived such a life. After digging the hole, he began to build the foundation of the city. How to build this city base? First, the foundation must be made, and the trench must be dug 3 to 4 feet deep and more than 2 feet wide. Then slowly build soil over the ditch. As for the hoe for digging the soil, the load for carrying the soil, and the odds and ends, you have to bring them all by yourself. It's so tiring. But the government didn't give him any money. Not paying is still a small matter. It is scheduled to start work at dawn and stop work at night. Anyone who does not follow the time will be supervised by officers and soldiers and will be whipped with a whip. So building the Great Wall is really hard work. Chapter 9 Make-up Work. It was mid-June, and it was already extremely hot in the Xianyang area. But at the northwest corner of the Great Wall, it was only hot for a while at noon. The rest of the time, even when wearing jackets or even cotton-padded clothes, it was still not hot. Shiliang has already dug a hole, and he is very lucky. Bai Qing and Akihito both live in the same place. Taking a break from work and talking to each other can relieve depression. That night, all 3 of them slept soundly, and suddenly they heard a loud sound of gongs in their ears. This kind of sound. It's to urge you to get to work quickly. The 3 of them quickly put on their clothes and got up, each carrying his own empty load, and ran to the gathering place. At this time, the sun in the east has just risen. Looking towards the east, the sun shines into the desert like a big golden plate. Under the sun, the desert ground felt like it was filled with rays of light. In the place where people gathered, there were only 1,000 people standing in the open space, with more than a dozen soldiers standing in front of them. Holding the whip in his hand, he looked at everyone. The 3 people ran quickly. After a while, he ran to where everyone was gathering. There was a soldier in front, who was in charge of the dozen or so caves in Shiliang, and shouted, "Why did you 3 get up so late at the same time? Fortunately, you came as soon as the gong was played. if you had gotten up a little later. These people have already gone to work, so you're welcome. I'm going to whip you half to death with this whip." The three of them scolded the man no matter what, and could only listen quietly, not even daring to breathe loudly. Another soldier said to that soldier, "Everyone is probably here. Let's do roll call in separate classes." The soldier agreed, yes. They called the name. They did not call each person's name, but divided them into groups of 10. If the groups were counted, the number of people would not be small. After the name was called, the soldier said, "Okay. Go and work." These more than 1,000 workers went to pick up the soil and start work. The city foundation here is completely completed, and now they are picking up the soil on the city foundation. Counting from both ends of the place where the soil is piled, the road is a mile long. Shiliang follows the others. I ran a mile and dug 2 baskets of soil, then picked them back immediately. Next to the mound, the soil was also piled into steps, so it didn't take much effort for those who carried the soil to the pile. Shiliang picked it about 7 or 8 times, and suddenly the northwest wind blew. It was windy at first. The clothes were just fluttering, and as long as people carried the soil and walked up hard, they could barely go up. Then the blowing got louder and louder, and suddenly there was a burst of yellow clouds rising from the ground in the northwest. I felt chaos, and the northwest corner was filled with black mist. The sky covers it. The sound of the strong wind sounded from the yellow clouds. Shiliang was carrying 2 baskets of soil and dumping them on the pile of soil. Suddenly a soldier shouted, "The strong wind is coming soon, everyone is carrying soil. Those who are building the city, stop working immediately and run away." He just yelled these words and ran away quickly. As soon as Shiliang finished pouring the soil, he saw the yellow cloud approaching, and he couldn't see the sky at that time. The force of the wind was beyond description. The soil pickers all put down their soil baskets. The person was blown to both sides. When Shiliang heard what the soldier said at first, he thought, "Why should we talk about a break from work?" Before the second thought came to his mind, he leaned to the side. The wind was as strong as a mountain falling, and Shiliang threw himself on the ground and crawled tightly. My body didn't dare to get up, and I couldn't, so I raised my head and looked around. At this time, the wind and sand were blowing in my face, and there was someone on the other side, but I couldn't see it. Since the wind is getting stronger and stronger, even the soil on the unfinished city wall is blowing up, and it is really impossible to stay here. I just crawled here, taking 2 steps and resting for a while. I finally reached the foot of the wall and passed out. Shihao seemed to feel that someone was moving his body, but after a while he completely lost consciousness. I don't know how much time has passed. I woke up in a daze, calmed myself for a while, and then slowly opened my eyes. It turned out that he was being teased and was already in his own cave. 2 people living in the same cave, Bai Qing and Akihito, sat on his bunk. The wind outside the cave is still very strong. 2 cotton-padded jackets have been hung at the door to block the wind. The cave is dark, and people in the cave can only see a shadow. Fortunately, Bai Qing and Akihito were familiar people, so they recognized them. He raised a hand to beckon. I fell outside and passed out. I have absolutely no idea what will happen next. It was probably the 2 brothers who carried me back, right? Akihito said, You guessed it right. We have brought you a bowl of water. Please drink some. Shiliang said, Thank you, brothers, there is water, I would like to take a sip. Bai Qing then lifted up his quilt, brought a bowl of water, and brought it to Shiliang's head. Shiliang raised his head, leaned on the edge of the bowl, drank half of the bowl, and then said, Thank you, brothers, there is still half a bowl of water. I will drink it later. Bai Qing said, You can finish your drink. Akihito and I asked for water from the officer, and each of us got a bowl. There are 2 bowls of water in total. You can drink it. Shiliang said, Don't you 2 drink it yourself? Akihito pointed to the entrance of the cave and said, If we need water, we can run 2 or 3 miles to find a spring. Don't we still know how to drink? Shiliang said, Of course this is good, but there is still a strong wind outside the cave. Akihito said, The wind is strong, we can't stay like this all our lives. Drink. When Shiliang heard this, he drank another half of the bowl. He drank so much water. Then I slept again, and my illness slowly healed. The wind blew all day and all night, then slowly stopped. In the afternoon, the sun came out and the soldiers beat the gongs again, urging everyone to resume work. When Bai Qing and Mingren were carrying their burdens and were about to go out, Shiliang is going too. Bai Qing said, Although you have recovered from your illness, your spirit has not recovered yet. You don't want to go. I'll tell you it's okay. Shiliang sighed and said, We said that the spirit has not recovered, but the officer may not be willing to believe it, so let's go. He said. So he picked up his basket. Since he was carrying the burden, Bai Qing did not dare to say anything at that time, because as soon as the gong was struck, there would be no time left. The 3 of them walked to the gathering place. Fortunately, most of them were still walking slowly. Because the wind was blowing very hard yesterday, everyone in the caves was blown away by the wind, so even though the gong was played once, some people still didn't arrive. An officer brought a dozen soldiers to the gathering place to take a look at these young people. Everyone is disheveled, and there are still many people who have not arrived. If you follow the rules of building the Great Wall, you will have to be beaten, but now that many people have not arrived, you can't get many beatings. The officer thought for a while and came up with an idea. Seeing that everyone had almost arrived, he said to everyone, Many of you have not come after the gong sounds. According to the usual rules, each of you will be whipped a few times. Because of the strong wind yesterday, this meal was avoided. But the work that should have been done yesterday cannot be avoided. Yesterday afternoon, this morning. It takes exactly a whole day in total, so hurry up and pick up the soil. You must make up the soil within at least 4 days. In this way, at most 5 loads of soil will be added in a day. You cannot say that it is impossible to pick up. If you can't make it up in 4 days, I won't spare you. You see. Others in the team are already at work, let's go. As he spoke, he pointed at the people building the city on both sides. Sure enough, there were thousands of people building the city, and work had resumed on both sides. None of these young people dared to say no, and they quickly stirred up dirt. Shiliang heard this. Although his illness was not cured, he did not dare to say anything, and he had to carry a few more loads of soil every day. It would take him 4 days to make up for the work he had missed on the day of the strong wind, so he had no choice but to carry it. But he was ill, and there was almost no way to pick out enough soil that day. Where can I make up for the soil from the day before yesterday? Fortunately, Bai Qing and Akihito were 2 strong young men. In addition to completely replenishing the soil in their own names, they also carried 3 more loads. In 4 days, they also replenished the soil in Shiliang's name. Shiliang had finished his work that day. When the 2 of them returned to the cave, he kowtowed to them 3 times at the entrance of the cave. The 2 people quickly helped him up. Bai Qing asked, "What do you mean?" Shiliang said, "You 2 brothers made up for my unpaid work on the day of the strong wind. If it weren't for the 2 of you, I wouldn't be able to make up for it. Kowtow to you too, this is my respect. As for repaying it, it depends on whether I am lucky or not. If God has mercy on me, let me endure all kinds of hardships for many years. If I really get to go home one day, I will be very grateful." After saying that, tears fell from his eyes one after another. Akihito said, "It doesn't have to be like this. We only carry 2 more loads of soil, so what does that mean? Although the 2 of them are nothing." In Ziliang's opinion, they saved him from death, which was a great kindness. Chapter 10 Heading East. The weather is slowly turning into autumn and chilly. Usually when it comes to the cold autumn wind, it doesn't happen until the end of September or the beginning of October. But in the Great Wall area, it was already very cold by this time. Shiliang had 2 good brothers working together to help him, and the work was completed smoothly. On this day, I showed the finished work to the officer. The officer saw that the earth they had built was as solid as stone, and he didn't say anything. This section is complete. It turns out that most of the Great Wall near the northwest was built of earth, and some gates were made of bricks. The earthen city wall is also very strong where it is well repaired. Wan Shiliang handed in the work that day and had to move to another place. It's time to build another section of the Great Wall. But the official hasn't said where to move, so everyone has to wait for the order. In this way, these more than 1,000 people will be fine. The cave they lived in only had room for 3 people to sleep, and it was so short that people could stand up. Just touching their heads, so the three of them had no choice but to sit outside the cave door and bask in the sun. Xi Liang was basking in the sun for a while, and suddenly he heard the dongshao blowing "wooli wooli" again. Naturally, it was Yang Bufan who was blowing it. Xi Liang said to Bai Qing and Mingren, "Bufan is playing dongshao again. I want to go take a look. Are you two going?" Neither of them could say anything, so Xi Liang followed the sound and looked for him. He sat on a stone on a high ground and played, and there were a few people listening. Bufan saw Xi Liang coming. Already. He stopped and Xiao Buchui came over and said, "Brother Xi Liang, are you feeling better?" Xi Liang said, "Although it's better, my limbs are weak. I have nothing to do today. It would be good if you could blow on it to relieve your depression." "Why don't you blow on it?" Bufan said. "We haven't had time to talk for a long time. Wouldn't it be good for us to talk? I heard that after the work is completed here, we will be transferred to the east, where it may be better." "Don't worry about it. My two brothers who are traveling with me will help me when I encounter problems, and they live together, which is very good. This time we move, I just hope they won't be separated. That'll be fine." Bufan said, "Probably not. I'm the same as you." Fortunately, several fellow villagers took care of him when he was in trouble. In terms of strength, we probably can't help anyone, but in terms of recognizing words, we are experts. Xi Liang sighed, "What's the use? Just as I was talking here, I saw a few soldiers shouting in separate directions. It is said, the officer has an order for you to assemble at the gathering place. If the officer has something to say to you, just go." After listening to the soldiers' words, everyone went to the gathering place, and sure enough, all the young people arrived after a while. The ruler also came and stood before everyone. He said loudly, "You have rested for a long time, and you have probably rested enough. We have now found a place to build the city, and we will go east from here, which is about 30 miles away. You quickly pack your things. After you finish packing, you will still come here to gather. I'll hit the gong again. Here we go." After the officer finished speaking, everyone went to their own caves. The luggage and other items had already been packed away. Everyone just needed to pick up their burdens and run to the gathering place. When the gong sounded, this person more than 1,000 people started walking eastward. At the front of the team was still the officer leading the way with more than a dozen soldiers, followed by dozens of soldiers for custody. The places we pass here are all places where young people have worked hard. Some of the city walls have been built, and some are half-built. Some have just laid the foundation. All the people who built the city dug holes to live in. There were also 1 or 2 rooms, which were the residences of the officials. However, the house mentioned is also very simple. It is divided into 2 or 3 rooms with wooden boards and covered with boards. Then spread the soil evenly on top and that's it. After walking for a long time, they arrived at the place designated for building the city. According to what they said on the edge of the Great Wall, this is a very good place. To the south, there are 2 hills. There are many poplar trees growing beside the hills. Mid-August. The northwest corner of the Great Wall is very cold. There were only a few scattered leaves on the poplar trees, which were blown by the wind. Turning towards the bottom of the hill, there is a very long ridge, which requires a lot of holes. The officer looked around and smiled, then said, "This is very good, just stay here." So the chief built the house and the young man dug the hole. In just 2 days, everything was done. This best place is not located in the desert, but a small plain, and here it is also very convenient to get water. Beside the hill, there is a clear spring. Work stopped very early that day, and it was the middle of the moon. Colorless and dark, Shiliang walked out of the cave and saw the moon rising from the east, illuminating the hill in black and white, slowly protruding from the distance and ending in front of him, like an embankment. There are a few trees on the mountain, and there is no wind at all, so the trees feel very fluffy. And there was water nearby, and I heard a little gurgling sound. Shiliang took out the bamboo slip carved by Meng Jiangnu from his body, placed it under the hill ridge, and looked at the moon. Thinking, the moon at home. I saw a bay of paddy fields and a few willow trees. Meng Jiangnu and I were facing each other in pairs. How beautiful it was! Now, seeing this mountain of dirt in the desert is a very nice sight. Meng Jiangnu, do you know? After a while, I climbed into the cave and felt no different from the dead. Meng Jiangnu, do you know? He stood alone on the ridge, just stroking the bamboo slips towards the moon. Suddenly someone shouted under the moon, "Shiliang, you are here alone just looking at the moon. Are you homesick again?" It turns out that Bai Qing also came out for a walk. I saw him standing here alone, seemingly in a daze, so I asked. Shiliang quickly put away the bamboo slips, nodded and said, "I feel a little homesick." Bai Qing sighed and said, "Missing home, who doesn't miss home? Let's change our thinking. For example, the 3 of us live together, thinking about how we can help each other. If we finish the work earlier than others, we will gradually have some hope of going home. Now if I just miss home, I will miss someone else." Shiliang said, "What you just said about you and me helping, that is certainly true. But I don't have any strength at all. How can I help you if you ask me to? But if you too help me, I will never forget it until I die." Bai Qing said, "If you want to help people, it doesn't all rely on strength. You have a lot of books, we should be able to get some." How good that is! Shiliang couldn't help but laugh and said, "What's the use of reading? Naturally, I read more books. May I ask, what are the benefits of this?" Bai Qing said, "My dear friend, this benefit depends on the future." This sentence was quite pertinent. Shiliang remained silent. At that time, Xiliang talked with Bai Qing and felt a little more relaxed. When Buyu saw the moon turning to the west, he went back to the cave to sleep. When Xiliang got up early the next morning, he was getting dressed and was about to go to work when a soldier came up and asked Xiliang, "Are you on Xiliang?" Xiliang said, "Yes." The soldier said, "You have come on a good errand. Our officer wants you to talk face to face." Akihito said, "Go quickly, we are waiting for your good news." With a smile on his face, Xiliang went with the soldiers. That day the sun rose 10 feet high. Before the gongs were sounded to urge these people to go to work, everyone carried their burdens and walked out of the cave, still standing and waiting. After waiting for a while, Xiliang slowly walked back. When he saw Bai Qing and Akihito at the entrance of the cave, he came over and bowed to them 3 times. The 2 of them didn't know why, so they quickly returned the gift. Xiliang said, "We met with the officer, and he said that we should go east for about 100 miles, where there is also a construction site. Since there were not enough people, we asked each team to investigate, and if there were more people, we would go with a few. Therefore, we here." A total of dozens of people were sent, and I was the one who went. If you say leave, you have to leave immediately. My 2 brothers have supported me all the way. My heartfelt gratitude is indescribable, so I would like to bid farewell to you both. There is no telling when we will meet in the future. As he spoke, he raised his hands a few more times. Bai Qing said, "My dear friend, you are leaving soon, then we will really lose a teacher." Akihito said, "This is really unexpected. Are there any acquaintances here?" Xiliang said, "The officer just called all the people who were leaving." There were 20 people in our group, and I didn't even recognize them. Fortunately, I know someone from another team, Yang Bufan. Bai Qing said, "He is also a living being. He can't help at all when it comes to contributing to the first level." Xiliang said, "There are 20 of us here, let me take a look." Those are all people who cannot contribute. As for the future, I can't worry too much now, so let's talk about it later. Akihito said, "They are all people who can't contribute, so how can they help if they are sent there?" Xiliang smiled bitterly and said, "You too, what else don't you understand? I don't think any team will send strong people to it, right?" Bai Qing said, "I still have some black buns here, let me bring them to you." Xiliang raised one hand, waved it several times, walked towards the cave, and said, "I don't need it. It's time to leave. We can't finish saying farewell at the moment, so we just keep it in mind." He said, picked up the things, picked up the burden, walked out of the cave, turned back to the 2 of them and said, "I'm leaving." He ran towards the gathering place. Bai Qing and Akihito were still at the entrance of the cave. Bai Qing said. He also set off from the gathering place, so we might as well go and have a look first, since we were all on the same journey from home to here. Akihito said it was right, and the 2 of them ran to the assembly ground. At this time, 20 people had arrived, and each of them placed their burdens in front of them. There were 8 other soldiers standing at both ends. Several other teams also mobilized dozens of people to gather here. Many people saw him off and stood in a big circle, surrounding those who were about to leave. Those who were about to leave just looked on both sides and did not dare to speak. It turned out that the official was also standing in the middle of the people seeing them off. Bai Qing and Akihito only nodded to each other when they saw Shiliang. The officer saw that everyone had already arrived and said, "Now everyone has arrived. You can go to another construction site from here." I have a few words to tell you. The official at this construction site is named Song Bishong. He is a much more powerful person than me. You should be careful. You go. I have to rest overnight on the way today and will be there tomorrow morning. After he finished speaking, he stretched out his hand. Just tell them to leave. These 8 soldiers, 4 in front and 4 in the back, supervised them. These young people looked at the people seeing them off and then left. Chapter 11, Searching for Bags. As we walk forward here, all the places we pass are construction sites. Each section of the construction site. Some have 2,000 people, some have 3,000 to 5,000 people, and they are all busy carrying earth to build walls. The team was walking among the crowds, but it was not lonely. After walking 60 or 70 miles, I stayed overnight in a cave on a construction site. On the second day, we walked another 60 or 70 miles. We arrived at the place of work. At first, the soldiers said that there was a shortage of people here, so they went to various sections to select and fill up. This was not the case. There are about 10,000 people here, which pales in comparison to the original construction site. The reason is that too many people died here. Have to add something. Shiliang took a look and saw that there was a large section of city wall here, which was almost 10 meters high. In addition to the people who carried the earth in groups, there were also people who were building the earth. More than a dozen people were holding large wooden stakes and raising them up and down. Down, hit the soil surface. Shiliang saw it. I thought to myself, why don't you pick me to drive piles? If you don't contribute to something like this, people won't agree to it. At this time, the sun was still 10 feet high, so work continued on the construction site. The soldiers led the team to stop outside a few houses. A soldier went in first to report. After a while, the soldier came out and ordered him to stand still. Behind him came a bearded officer with thick eyebrows and big eyes, a murderous look on his face, wearing a blue uniform and holding a gun in his hand. Holding a horse whip, he stood still and said, "There are 11,000 young people here, which is not a small number, but this section of the Great Wall is much longer than other places, and in this month, there have been many illnesses and many deaths. You are here to fill the gap." On the contrary, people arrive every day, and 3 batches came today. Now you don't need to dig a hole, there is already a hole here, you can just move in and live in it. Tomorrow morning, I will tell you where you want to go. Speaking of which, He looked back and saw 2 soldiers standing behind him, and said, "Send them from number 24 to cave number 34. After he finished speaking, he took the horse whip and strode away. Xiliang thought to himself, "It's not bad, there will be a hole when we come." Save yourself from the fight. At that moment, everyone took up their burdens, and a dozen soldiers followed the officer's instructions and led them through a mound and through several rows of cave doors before they found the designated cave. The soldier smiled and said, "You sleep in this cave. Don't talk loudly. There is an old neighbor living here, and we won't mess with him. There are 20 people in your first row. There is cave number 10 here. 2 people just filled up one cave." Did you hear that? Everyone agreed that they heard it. The soldier sent 2 of the 20 men in for each hole they passed. At that time, everyone had nothing to say. After Xiliang and a man named Su Zai moved in, they saw a person wrapped in a quilt and sleeping with his face in the cave. Still slept soundly. Xiliang gently said to Su Zai, "He is sleeping, let's put things down gently and don't disturb him." Su Zai agreed. So the 2 of them laid out their bedding, walked the route, and then lay down to rest for a while. Just then, Yang Bufan came to the entrance of the cave and asked, "Brother Xiliang, is there someone sleeping in your cave?" Xiliang said, "Yes, this man slept soundly. After we entered the cave, he still didn't wake up." Bufan said, "Go and have a look. He may not wake up. Because there is also a person sleeping in my cave, but he is dead." Xiliang said hurriedly, "Is there such a thing? I'd like to see what happens." After he said that, he came close to the man and lifted his hand. The man still didn't move. He leaned over and took a look. This man had only a little bit of energy and no movement at all. Although he was not dead, he seemed to be close to death. Then he touched his body, and there was still some warmth in his limbs, and called out, "Friend, what exactly are you unhappy about? Can you speak?" The man was not asleep. He opened his eyes and moved his mouth. Xiliang said to Bufan, "Our man is not dead yet. If someone takes care of him, he will definitely survive. I have some powder here, and I plan to give him some food. I also want some water to moisten his throat." But where to get water? Bufan said, "Since he can still live, he can do all these good deeds for free. If you want water, I'll go." Bufan went for a while, took his own bowl, scooped out a bowl of water and brought it to him. Xiliang took it and leaned it against the man's mouth. After feeding him half a bowl of water, he turned around and poured the powder into the bowl of cold water. He mixed it with his fingers and brought it to his mouth. He was able to swallow it. For a while, I actually swallowed half a bowl of water-soaked powder. Xiliang smiled and said to Bufan, "This person seems to be able to survive. Otherwise, why can you give him something to eat and he can eat it right away and it still tastes delicious?" Bufan said, "That's good. It was getting dark at that time. Buffon took the bowl back, and Xiliang was eager to sleep, so he opened the quilt and fell asleep. He was a little confused just now. I saw torches raised high outside the cave, saying that the official was here and had something to say. Tell the dozens of people who arrived today to come out of the cave quickly. Xiliang didn't know who was talking. Since the official was here, of course everyone had to get up. In a short time, everyone came outside the cave. There is a mound outside the cave. 10 soldiers are holding torches high. The bearded Song Bizhong is standing under the torch. When he saw everyone had come, he gesticulated and said loudly, "When you go to work tomorrow, I will give each of you a bamboo slip. Just follow the location marked on the bamboo tube and go to work. You don't need to pick up the soil, just follow the big wooden piles and build the soil together. There is one more thing, you must comply. If you don't comply, you will starve to death. You set out at home with your own money. Therefore, all along the way and at the construction site, we are eating ourselves. But I want to ask how much money you have with you. I'm afraid the money you brought is only enough to last for half a year, right? What do you do after you finish eating?" He said this. Everyone thought it was good, because no one had thought about what to do after eating. Song Bizhong stroked his beard with his hand and said with a smile, "Of course anyone would think of this. We, the first emperor, have already made arrangements for all of you to eat and drink. It is completely run by the government and does not require you to contribute a penny. This edict has arrived at the construction site." When everyone heard that eating for free is really a virtuous policy, what's the benefit of hearing it again? Song Bizhong continued, "Eating is free of charge. Then the money you bring from home is superfluous. Now I ask our soldiers to search your baggage and pockets. How much money you have, all of it will be kept for the public. We will only keep this money for you. I can't touch you at all. When you have finished your work and everyone goes home, then return all the money you have saved. But now, you have to hand over all the money you have no use for." There were also 10 soldiers standing under the mound. Song Bizhong straightened his color and said loudly, "You guys come with me to search." After he finished speaking, the dozens of soldiers immediately carried out the order given by the commander, first handing over dozens of bamboo slips to each of them. After the bamboo slips were handed over, the soldiers held torches. He quickly went into the cave, thoroughly cleaned everyone's money pockets, and searched all the clothes and various odds and ends. Then he walked out of the cave and inspected everyone's clothes one by one. After checking, put the money away together. When the young people saw this, it looked like a robbery, so the expressions on their faces changed. One of them couldn't help it anymore and said, "Whether we save money or not is our own business. Why did you search our luggage?" Song Bizhong was in the shadows at this time. When he heard what he said, he came over and laughed loudly and said to the soldier, "This boy doesn't know how powerful Grandpa Song is. After speaking, he glared, his laughter immediately turned into a murderous voice, and loudly said, "Hit me. Beat him to death and throw him outside the Great Wall together with the dying man in his cave. Beat." He gave the order here, and 4 soldiers ran over, took horse whips, and whipped the young man on the head, feet, and body. At first a few times, the man jumped up and down. He was still struggling desperately, but within a short time, he fell to the ground. The 4 soldiers took turns and whipped them several times with their whips, and the young man made no sound at all. Only then did Song Bizhong look at everyone and said with a sinister smile, "Did you see it? Anyone who disobeys me is a good example. No need to fight, let's go." After saying that, he led the soldiers and laughed all the way away. Chapter 12 Bad News. When the young man was beaten, dozens of people here watched intently. "Beat him there." Ouch! The bodies of dozens of people here flashed to the side at the same time. Later, the man was beaten and rolled to the ground. Among the dozens of people, 2 people also fell to the ground in fright. Shiliang was among the crowd. "It's very unfair to beat someone like this. I just wanted to jump out and knock Song Bizhong over." But Yang Bufan saw his feet moving a few times and quickly moved behind a person and waved his hand towards him. Shiliang thought for a while. His physical strength was not good to begin with. In addition, Song Bizhong was holding a riding whip in his hand. If he tried to move here, his whip would rush towards him, and he would die, so he couldn't move it. But when I saw this man lying on the ground and the 4 soldiers still beating him with whips, I really felt that I couldn't get out of my anger. He just gritted his teeth and made a squeaking sound. Later, Song Bizhong laughed wildly and led the soldiers away proudly. Only then did he dare to breathe out. Wait until Song Bizhong's laughter left in the distance. Several people here hurried over and squatted on the ground, feeling the injured person's breath. Shiliang said, "Although this man will not die, he will be half dead after a beating. I think we should move this man into the cave and let him have a good rest." Although he said this, no one in this group of people dared to step forward. Shiliang looked more and more sad, and said, "I want to lift him up, maybe it doesn't matter? I'll lift one end, and there's another end. I wonder, Brother Fan, why don't you do one?" Said so. Bufan had no choice but to raise his head. They carried the man into the cave, and then came out to listen to the officer. There was no sound. They thought that nothing was wrong, so they went into the cave again, stretched out their hands, and touched the patient's nostrils. "Breathe well." Su Zai also entered the cave at this time and asked, "How is the patient?" Shiliang said, "This man can be saved and his breathing is fine. Let's give him some food tomorrow and see how he is doing. It's just that my little money has been confiscated. How can I live in the future? It's a problem." Zai said, "Who is not the same? Although the person who was beaten was not dead, I think he was better off." Shi Liang was too lazy to say anything, so he just let out a long sigh. The next day, Shi Liang scooped up a spoonful of powder and put it next to the man's hand. Then he walked out of the cave, looked at the bamboo slips he received last night, and saw that they were at the construction site of Section 18, and said to Zai, "Needless to say, you are also at the construction site of Section 18, right?" Zai stood at the entrance of the cave, looked at the bamboo slips, shook his head and said, "No. I am at the construction site of Section 207. Shi Liang said, "This is no longer a construction site. Do we have a lot of room for 20 of us?" Zai said, "That's probably it." Shi Liang was also a little confused, so he went to each cave and asked, and sure enough, the 19 people were all different. As for the man who was beaten last night, he was actually dead. There are also people who are dying in various caves. 2 people died last night. It is not known how these 3 dead people were buried, but the cave has been reported. Everyone is assigned to different places, so everyone has to find his own place. This is the sun. Already over 10 feet tall. Looking at the gathering place, the people were divided into 10 or 20 sections, and they all slowly stood up. Fortunately, there are wooden signs at each section, which is easy to find. There are only more than 200 people in Shi Liang's section. Among the more than 200 people, there were several people carrying large piles. There are also a dozen people holding small stakes. One of them, a fat man, saw Shi Liang looking for the sign and said, "Hey. Are you new here to find your place of work?" Shi Liang said, "Yes. At the 18th section of the construction site, we gather here, right?" The fat man said, "Yes, it's here. I am the foreman, my surname is Hong. If anything happens, just ask the man named Hong. You found the construction site. Come over here. What's your last name?" Shi Liang told him his name. Fatty Hong looked Shi Liang up and down a few times, rubbed his hands together, and sighed. Kai said, "Although there are a few new people here, they are all useless. What's the use of people coming here? Wan Shiliang came today, and this is another useless person." After hearing about Foreman Hong's work, Shiliang was dissatisfied with himself. He had to deal with it properly, otherwise. This level is not easy to pass. Everyone was standing here, and of course there were more soldiers. After calling their names, they went to work. Shiliang looked at the city wall he was supposed to build, and it happened to be facing Song Bijong's house, so he couldn't be lazy. If you are lazy, you will be seen. These more than 200 people regarded Foreman Hong as their leader and asked him to leave first, while everyone else followed behind. When they got to the city wall, he assigned them, half to carry soil and half to drive piles. Shi Liang divided the piles into pieces and held the end of a straw rope. There is another person holding the rope in the middle. 4 ropes occupied 8 people, and 8 people held the handles of the wooden stakes and lifted the wooden stakes upwards. The people holding the rope with Duke Zurego were also newcomers and had no strength. While working. Pull the rope down, and that's it. Maybe others can't see it, but Foreman Hong, he doesn't do anything. He looks to the east and west, and then sneers at the two of them. The two heard Foreman Hong smile like this. I know I have no strength to smile. At this time, the two people looked at each other, and it was obvious that they wanted to help each other. So the two of them worked hard to hold the pile down, but they didn't know whether their strength was enough or not. There are 2 breaks from work. Have lunch later. This time we had lunch at a public house, so naturally we didn't eat on the construction site. We had a piece of flat land just down from the city wall, so we ate here. Fortunately, there was no wind at this time, and the sun was just shining, so I sat here with some warmth. After a while, the rice came, but several people were carrying big buckets, and several others were carrying baskets made of tree sticks. They came and put them on the ground. When they opened them, they found chopsticks and bowls inside. Open the lid of the vat again and start serving rice. Actually, it's not rice. It's not steamed buns or noodles, it's just a powder paste slightly thicker than water. A little salt is put in it and it is served as a side dish. As for Foreman Hong, he doesn't eat here, and he doesn't know what he eats. It is natural for every young person to eat like this. How many bowls to eat? As for dry food, it only takes 2 days to eat 1 meal, which is fried rice noodles. Eating 1 black bun in 4 days is considered a big meal. Shiliang finished his work and then went back slowly. This is a gratifying thing. The patient is getting much better. The powder Shiliang put on hand for him was eaten up. Before Shiliang could say anything, he said, "Thank you for saving my life. But you don't have many fans to help your friends. I beg you to appeal to the foreman tomorrow and reward me with some food." Shiliang said. How do you starve? The man said, "First I got sick, and then I got better. They just didn't want me to get better, so they didn't give me food." After hearing this, Shiliang thought, how much is a bowl of this paste worth? If the disease cannot be cured, he will not eat it. It is unbearable to starve people to death. Just as he was thinking this, Bufan asked at the entrance of the cave, "Is Shiliang back?" Shiliang said, "I'm back. How's it going? Do you have anything to say?" Bufan said, "The 3 dead people were all dragged away." Shiliang asked, "Where is it buried?" Bufan said, "I heard that 3 people were thrown into the sand. They were not buried, but covered with sand." After hearing this, Shiliang pounded his fist on the edge of the bunk a few times and sighed, "What is a death like this? People are so worthless. There is no sound here." Na Bufan had nothing to say and left quietly. The sky was still a little dim, and I saw Su Zai holding a left hand and walking back slowly without entering the cave. He just sat down at the entrance of the cave. Shiliang said, "Zai, you came back too late." Zai said, "Oh." It's too late to come back. I almost had to come back. Shiliang said, So, you were beaten? Zai sighed, No. It was about to end work, so I walked up to the city wall to see what the situation was like. It didn't matter. The foreman said I didn't understand the rules. He picked up the riding crop and whipped me 3 times. Still on the right side of the city wall, the foreman of another number said, Forget it, work is about to end. That's why I didn't smoke. Otherwise, why don't you get whipped more than 10 times? When Shi Liang heard this, he thought to himself, I can't die, and I can't live. This life is really hard. A patient here just now said that he wanted me to sue the foreman for him tomorrow and reward him with a bowl of rice. In my opinion, it is better to say less. I still have powder in my basket, which will help him for 2 days. As for asking the foreman to reward him with food, then you can tell him when he gets better. I don't have the strength anymore. Thinking about it makes me sigh.